Hello everyone. Welcome to Podcast Buddhism. Today, we will talk about the topic, suffering and happiness. In our discussion, we'll explore how our actions and mindset shape our experiences of joy and sorrow, both in this life and beyond. We'll delve into the teachings of the Buddha to understand how present suffering can lead to future happiness, and how cultivating a positive, ethical life can bring long-lasting peace and fulfillment. Let's embark on this insightful journey together. Suffering and happiness. The Buddha outlines 4 scenarios of suffering and happiness that are entirely dependent on the mental tendencies and actions of each individual, according to the timelines of the present and future. He uses these 4 scenarios to establish faith in the law of cause and effect and the value of behavior in daily life. This discourse indirectly answers the question, why do many bad or evil actions not immediately result in negative consequences, while many good deeds seem to bring about misfortune? Some people confuse good and bad, right and wrong, leading them to lose faith and abandon the ethical path they once followed, thinking that karma is something predestined by a deity or some divine being. This misconception causes people to lose their direction and sometimes diminishes their moral character and their inclination toward virtuous living, which they have cultivated over many years. The concept of Dharma practice in the middle-length discourses, particularly in this sutra translated from Pali as Dhamma Samadhana, can be misunderstood if translated literally from the Chinese versions as methods of Dharma practice. This concept should be understood simply as 4 efforts. Efforts for beneficial living and efforts for any virtue. These efforts lead to results. In other words, the essence of the results lies in the nature of the effort. Each effort reveals the essence of a different type of cause and effect, and the timing of these effects. There are many different perspectives when discussing suffering and happiness. We can temporarily categorize them into 3 viewpoints on karma. One perspective holds that suffering and joy are matters of perception. If we think something is suffering, it becomes suffering. If we perceive it as joy, it becomes joy. Suffering and joy have no clear measure or balance and depend on individual perspectives, culture, customs, communities, or different governments. Placing the value of suffering and joy on the foundation of perception has both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that if a person has an optimistic and life-loving nature, they will not see life's events as misfortunes, but as challenges, necessary conditions for developing virtue, resilience, and special abilities, making them stronger. This perspective turns difficult life circumstances into benefits and misfortunes into happiness. For example, many Buddhists feel conflicted when their children express a desire to become monks. Instead of supporting them, they dissuade them, saying, "Why become a monk? It's so hard in the temple. Is your life over that you want to live in a temple?" Some even cite stories they've heard about monks who lacked resolve and abandoned monastic life due to minor adversities. Hearing such stories, many lose faith and their noble ideals, believing that being a monk is suffering. Rather than monastic life is bliss, and thus do not allow their children to pursue it. The disadvantage of viewing suffering and joy as personal perceptions lies in setting criteria for suffering based on a lack of enjoyment, inability to do what one pleases, and having to adhere to ethical, spiritual, and transformative practice. Those with this perspective feel they are experiencing great suffering. Everyone has limits, and achieving perfection requires the support of ethical living, precepts, body-mind discipline, and guidance from those who have gone before. This perspective makes people feel happy whenever they receive advice because they understand they cannot see themselves, just as a mirror cannot reflect its own image. Therefore, they do not feel hurt or resentful when receiving sincere advice. This is one way of understanding suffering and joy. A family consisting of a husband, wife, and a son lived happily. One morning, the husband woke up to find his son eating breakfast alone while his wife was out. He groggily felt around and found a letter. After rubbing his eyes, he read it. "Dear, have breakfast. I'm going to the market. Have a nice morning." The husband was surprised by his wife's unusually caring gesture. Looking around, he saw freshly ironed clothes, polished shoes, and an unusually tidy house. He struggled to remember what happened last night but couldn't because he was too drunk. He asked his son, who recounted, "Last night you came home drunk, vomiting and breaking things. Mom had to help you to bed. When she was taking care of you and changing your clothes, you pushed her away and said, 'Please, stay away, I have a wife.'" The husband then understood that his wife must have felt immense happiness hearing those sincere words from his heart, spoken in a drunken state. Although she knew about his drinking habit, which could cause suffering in many families, she felt truly happy in this situation. In this scenario, the wife's perception of happiness is personal. She strives to maintain a faithful family, even though true happiness may be limited due to a lack of shared emotions between husband and wife and insufficient care for their child. The husband seeks his happiness in his drinking buddies, considering family responsibilities a burden. This misguided perception of suffering and joy leads to a loss of direction for many. Meanwhile, as a devoted wife and mother, she overlooks his vices because her greatest happiness is his faithfulness. This personal view of happiness can sometimes force people into situations with no choices left, comforting themselves that they are still luckier than others in worse situations. This self-consolation can be a therapeutic method to attain temporary peace or happiness, but is not true happiness. Happiness through experience. Some believe that happiness can be expressed through experiences. Speaking of experience refers to something personal. Only those in that situation can truly understand its nature. Buddhism describes, just as someone drinking water knows whether it is hot or cold and to what extent, others cannot feel the same essence of that heat or cold. The notion of suffering and happiness falls under this experiential category. Naturally, it carries a subjective element, as it depends on the individual's perspective, and the value of that perspective influences people to a limited extent. However, Buddhist scriptures, especially the Na Tien Te Keo Sutra, clearly state it is not always necessary to go through an experience to gain knowledge about a particular matter. People can use methods of deduction, induction, analogy, and synthesis to understand an event quite accurately as if they were involved. Na Tien Te Keo asked King Melinder, "Your Majesty, as the ruler of a nation, how do you know that a condemned prisoner suffers greatly, enough for you to use their punishment as an exemplary lesson to deter your subjects? What gives you this perspective?" The king replied, "Venerable sir, when a condemned prisoner is brought to the court and the executioner's sword touches their neck, we observe that the person's eyes close and they muster all their strength to push away and deny the existing pain. When the sword completes its path and the head falls from the body, death begins to manifest, and we see the body convulsing, sometimes clinging to the stocks, the table, or the chair to transfer the pain to anything nearby. This proves that the prisoner releases their pain through expressions of screaming, closed eyes, grimacing, and convulsing, and by clinging to something, allowing the observer to ascertain the suffering occurring in their emotions." The Venerable Na Tien explained, "Similarly, Your Majesty, a person who attains happiness will feel the quality of nirvana. The expression in their language, their movements, their daily activities will show a natural ease, completely different from someone pretending. The happiness of nirvana and its serene quality must be expressed naturally, without any effort or pretense. Therefore, an experienced observer can discern whether a monk or practitioner has truly attained a state of peace. By observing their language, movements, daily interactions, especially when they are unaware they are being watched, one can tell. The essence of happiness and suffering, if considered purely from an experiential perspective, is not entirely accurate. There are aspects related to intuitive judgment, observable through sight, thought, or based on the expressions of language or body movements. One can deduce, infer, and synthesize to conclude whether a person is happy or sad. For instance, when a football player scores a goal, thousands of people clap and cheer. Globally, those watching on television also rejoice, with some even hugging their TV sets. These expressions lead to a simple conclusion that they are happy. Conversely, those who do not support the scoring team will feel sadness. Joy and sorrow appear on faces at the same time in the same stadium, even within the same household between family members, if they have different views on support. Suffering belongs to emotions, and joy also belongs to emotions. Speaking of emotions includes the inertia of karma, culture, customs, and personal life. It is a combination of experiential aspects, perceptions, and general rules of deduction, inference, and synthesis. Thus, Buddhism assesses the nature of suffering and joy based on emotional currents. If using a mathematical model, emotions can be represented as a sine wave with a wavy curve. When the sine wave reaches its peak, it temporarily represents the nature of joy. When it dips to its lowest point, it represents suffering. The nature of this sine wave of emotional suffering and joy is always variable and never constant. This continuous change makes people constantly chase it without ever catching up if they are inclined to depend on it. Affirming the nature of suffering and joy as tied to emotions helps practitioners avoid relying on emotions, as emotions depend heavily on conditions, environment, circumstances, relationships, weather, and climate. These factors create favorable or unfavorable conditions, making emotions in the same situation sometimes joyful, sometimes sorrowful. Many practitioners think that participating in a competition is a joy because they are confident after achieving high marks in district-level competitions a month earlier. Others enter the competition with the desire to win first place and bring honor to their temple, class, or teacher. Unfavorable results cause disappointment and avoidance. Some contestants, knowing their test results will be inaccurate due to the sheer volume of entries, gather to discuss and judge the difficulty and traps of the test. Speculations arise about younger students outperforming those who have studied Buddhism for 5 to 10 years, possibly due to some external support. Numerous comments and assessments arise around the competition, leading to feelings of suffering and joy. If contestants view the competition as an opportunity to experience and refine their Buddhist knowledge, aiming to apply it practically, the results, whether high or low, do not bother them. They focus on understanding why they answered incorrectly, seeing it as a chance to learn new knowledge. This progressive attitude in studying makes results secondary. Hence, high scores do not make them overly happy, and unsatisfactory scores do not dishearten them. This attitude helps them master their emotions. I hope that all participants in competitions adopt this mindset, as luck plays a significant role in exams. Each examiner has a unique scoring system, and multiple examiners result in varied grading styles. Furthermore, Buddhist examination rooms often do not meet standard requirements due to limited facilities, making it easy for examinees to cheat. Despite these limitations, organizing such competitions is seen by the organizing committee as a way to revive the spirit of learning among Buddhists, which had been dormant for decades. Previously, Buddhist studies were widespread in secondary and university levels, with both monastic and lay scholars actively participating in various social professions, using their Buddhist knowledge as a guiding principle to serve culture and the nation. Naturally, Buddhist studies were not intended to be limited to monastics. We hope to see more educated laypeople in the future. Thus, in the efforts of examination, success and failure can become sources of happiness and suffering. View each exam as an opportunity to learn and apply Buddhist teachings practically. Making mistakes in exams helps remember the teachings better than getting them right and becoming complacent. Therefore, the notion of suffering and joy as emotions allows individuals to master themselves in different favorable and unfavorable situations. Present joy, future suffering. The concept of future encompasses what may happen in the coming decades of a person's life. It can also include the idea of the next life or future rebirths. The sutra presents two main perspectives on the indulgence in the 5 sensual pleasures. One perspective held by some ascetics and Brahmins is the indulgence in the 5 sensual pleasures with the misguided belief that there is no fault in enjoying these desires. In this sutra, the terms ascetic and Brahmin refer to all monastic practitioners. During the Buddha's time, ascetics consisted of 3 main groups: the Jain monks, those with materialistic tendencies, and the Buddhist monks. The term ascetic is used as a revolutionary concept in religious practice, marking a departure from the traditional acceptance of Brahma as the creator god. These practitioners also rejected the Vedic scriptures as the ultimate source of unchanging truth. They believe that individuals must make personal efforts to seek happiness rather than depend on divine beings. In contrast, Brahmin priests relied entirely on the Vedic scriptures and the grace of the gods. They accepted the division of society into 4 castes, likening them to the 4 wheels of a chariot, necessary for the smooth functioning of society. Externally, this caste system appeared logical, but internally, it served as a justification for the privileges of the ruling and religious classes. Despite the ascetic, self-reliant tendencies, many still indulged in the 5 sensual pleasures without considering their potential hindrance to spiritual progress. In Buddhism, pleasure is synonymous with happiness, and desire can be understood in 2 ways. The first meaning, kama, refers to sexual activity. Thus, sensual pleasure is happiness derived from sexual enjoyment. The second meaning, chanda, refers to wishes or desires. Happiness is the successful fulfillment of desires, pursuing what one longs for, living with a loved one, following a career that suits one's talents, or doing work one loves. For many, this is considered happiness. Even in the limited sense of sexual desire, sensual pleasure equates to living a life that places the essence of happiness in the enjoyment of pleasurable experiences. In other words, without hedonism, happiness for worldly people ceases to exist. Many Buddhists express concern when their children wish to ordain, saying, "Why become a monk? It's so hard living in a monastery, eating simple meals, sleeping on hard beds, waking up at 4 in the morning for meditation, chanting 4 times a day. No movies, no outings, always having to follow strict rules. It's unbearable." Such Buddhists, who view the triple gem as a precious jewel and offer daily respects, yet say becoming a monk is suffering, reveal a misunderstanding. In reality, monks do not suffer, but are quite content. Humorously, they save on shampoo, dandruff treatments, and haircuts by being bald. They need only 2 or 3 robes for the entire year, which they can easily repair when torn. Their diet is simple, often just 2 bowls of rice per meal, accompanied by light vegetable dishes. They sleep anywhere and anytime, unaffected by unfamiliar places or time zone changes. Without worries or sorrows, what greater happiness could there be? For those ascetics and Brahmins with erroneous views, indulgence in the 5 sensual pleasures means getting absorbed in forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile sensations. Forms. Indulgence in forms may lead a monk to dress like a layperson, wear adornments, and live like a family member. Most religions, except Buddhism, have some degree of sensual indulgence in forms. Monks might keep hair and dress in lay clothes to blend in. This blending makes it difficult to maintain self-discipline, as they may easily fall into hedonism without conscious effort to transform their mind. Sounds. Some Brahmin and ascetic monks might enjoy worldly music, love songs, or movie soundtracks, preferring expensive cassettes over religious music. Smells. Enjoyment of smells includes using perfumes, fragrant soaps, cosmetics, jewelry, pearls, coral, amber, collectively known as the 7 treasures, for personal adornment. Monks of other religions wear distinct attire, unlike the simple ochre robes of Buddhist monks. Ochre robes are a mix of black, brown, and gray, appearing old and less prone to dirt. The Buddha advised monks to bathe only once every 2 weeks. Cleanliness and attractiveness can contribute to sexual attraction. Some argue that water scarcity in ancient India led the Buddha to this rule, but this is incorrect. The Buddha's teachings primarily aimed to prevent sensual indulgence, fostering a sense of spiritual contentment through simplicity and ethical integrity. Thus, evaluating Buddhist monks based solely on appearance can lead to misunderstandings. Tastes. Enjoyment of tastes relates to food culture, such as gourmet dishes or nourishing foods. Eating habits are tied to one's emotional needs. For example, physical laborers and athletes often prefer substantial protein-rich meals to meet their energy needs. Food choices can reflect a person's spiritual culture. Dietary habits can hinder spiritual practice. The 5 pungent plants, garlic, onions, shallots, leeks, and asafoetida, are discouraged in Chinese Buddhist monastic rules, especially for those receiving bodhisattva or bhikkhu precepts. Chinese masters explain that consuming these plants produces body odors that repel protective deities. Many abstain from them to seek divine protection on their spiritual path. In truth, these plants stimulate sexual hormones, and the Buddha advised monastics to avoid them to reduce hormonal activity thus maintaining emotional stability unlike lay people. Touch. Indulgence in touch may involve habits or addictions related to hugging and caressing, like the early stages of love. The Buddha advised monks to transform this aspect. He noted that ascetics and Brahmins with wrong views believe there is no obstacle in enjoying these desires, thus living like lay people. While they may enjoy life now, in the near or distant future, they will face the consequences of indulgence while posing as monks. Chinese Buddhist patriarchs use the metaphor of bearing horns and wearing fur to describe repaying the debt to lay donors. They also liken monastics receiving offerings to a grindstone, sharpening donors' tools, symbolizing the donor's merits, while gradually wearing away the grindstone, the monastic's spiritual capital. Therefore, the Buddha encouraged monastics to practice well and study the Dharma diligently to help lay people overcome difficulties. Lay people provide material support, while monastics offer spiritual guidance. This mutual exchange benefits both, creating experts in their respective fields. Lay people excelling in economics and monastics in spirituality, so neither side is indebted. This reciprocal support system ensures both parties benefit without spiritual debt, encouraging monastics to use their spiritual resources wisely, thus achieving better practice results. Lay people engrossed in sensual pleasures believe this to be the essence of happiness, enjoying the present while unknowingly inviting future suffering. According to Buddhism, happiness is an emotional experience. If something aligns with one's preferences, it brings happiness. If not, it becomes an obstacle. Many think that indulgence equates to happiness, leading them to act against laws and morals to satisfy their desires, especially if they hold the misguided belief that there's no fault in enjoying sensual pleasures. While lawful and moral indulgence is acceptable for lay people, their happiness is often bound to achieving dreams, maintaining a family, having a stable job, and enjoying recreational activities. Sensual enjoyment is not only permissible but seen as essential for them. The indulgence of lay people may exploit legal loopholes supported by power and status, masking negative outcomes in the present. This discrepancy leads many to question why the unjust seem happy while the righteous suffer. They fail to recognize that karma depends heavily on conditions. In such cases, positive conditions temporarily mask negative deeds, which may manifest in future lives or later stages of this life when merits are exhausted. The 2006 coup in Bangkok, which ousted Prime Minister Thaksin while he attended a UN meeting in New York, forced him and his ministers into exile. Analyzing this from a karmic perspective aligns with the principle of present joy, future suffering. The coup stemmed from Thaksin's evasion of taxes on a nearly $2 billion sale to a Singaporean company. When opposition parties exposed this, the public revolted against him, leading to the political crisis from 2005 to 2006, culminating in the coup. While in power, a leader's mistakes might be covered up, with even the Supreme Court hesitating to intervene. However, once their influence wanes, their past errors resurface, and they must face legal consequences. Butchers, earning well for decades, often suffer severe hallucinations in old age, haunted by the animals they killed. These delusions, filled with the cries and images of the slaughtered animals seeking revenge, lead to profound suffering. Many butchers mimic the sounds of animals they once killed, reflecting their deep-seated karmic repercussions. Ultimately, when negative karma peaks, they bear the full brunt of their past actions. Some actions yield results only in later life or future rebirths. The Buddha addressed this hesitation directly, explaining why the virtuous might not see immediate rewards, while the wicked seem to prosper temporarily. Present suffering, future suffering. The text outlines that many practitioners undergo self-inflicted suffering in this life and continue to experience suffering in future lives. The Buddha presents two cases. 1. Practitioners who follow the practice of asceticism. They do not wear clothes and endure the extreme weather conditions of northern India. In winter, temperatures can drop to 0 degrees Celsius, and in summer, they can range from 43 degrees Celsius to 47 degrees Celsius. These practitioners do not use any means to cool or warm themselves, believing that returning to a primitive state will help them attain happiness and reflect the true nature of humans. They think that all forms of clothing and behavior lead to indulgence in sensual pleasures. The essence of these ascetic practitioners is their serious dedication. They are not concerned with sensory pleasures or worldly happiness. They seek higher spiritual values. However, unfortunately, they follow a misguided method, subjecting their bodies to self-torment for many years. The Buddha noted, this does not demonstrate compassion for the body. During cold seasons at 5 in the morning, these naked ascetics would bathe in the Ganges River, hoping to wash away the impurities of the world. Instead of cleansing impurities, they often contracted diseases like arthritis and other serious illnesses. In India, the tradition of naked asceticism still exists. Practitioners believe this method is correct. The Buddha stated, anyone who practices such severe asceticism throughout their life will be reborn in poverty. The results of one's actions match the nature of those actions. If one practices the behavior of a cow, they will be reborn as a cow. If one practices the behavior of a dog, they will be reborn as a dog. If someone does not speak, the worst outcome is muteness. Buddhists should not practice silence in the sense of not speaking at all. Having a mouth is to speak truthfully, to declare beneficial things, to spread useful knowledge, and to encourage others to rise from suffering. The Buddha's 49 years of teaching were 49 years of speaking. He delivered tens of thousands of sutras. No other spiritual teacher has spoken as much because he saw that humans have superior communicative abilities compared to other animals. Of course, when beginning to practice meditation, people tend to live in seclusion, reducing social interaction and language use significantly during the practice period. In Buddhism, suffering and pain should not lead to gossip, criticism, or division. The Buddha said that doing so is like bringing fire to one's home and burning the peace and happiness of others. One should calmly find the root of the problem to transform it. Sharing one's feelings with many people is not only unhelpful, but can sometimes be harmful. Of course, sharing with close friends can help overcome suffering. Today, psychological counseling services are very useful. We can share our problems with the assurance that they have confidentiality policies and pledges to protect the privacy of their clients. Unrestrainedly sharing personal issues can lead to unnecessary complications and stress. Those who live with wrong views and wrong precepts. Wrong views include misconceptions about the nature of cause and effect, the nature of life, failing to see the connection to impermanence, non-self, or believing the universe was created by a god and that human existence is a predetermined fate. All fatalistic, random, and causeless views are considered wrong views. Practices of those with wrong views are called wrong precepts. Precepts are ethical practices. When these practices do not lead to happiness, such as practicing naked asceticism, adopting animal behaviors, practicing silence, or engaging in superstitious and animistic worship, e.g. sun worship, fire worship, snake worship, cow worship, and totem worship, they fall under wrong views and wrong precepts. In 2006, Global News reported that the leader of a new religious sect in Japan was sentenced to death. This leader believed that the end of the world was near and encouraged people to commit suicide to find happiness. He once visited a house with 12 members, and after he left, all 12 members burned the house down and committed suicide. This wave of suicides became severe over a decade. In 2006, he was sentenced to death, highlighting how wrong views lead to wrong actions, resulting in suffering. Therefore, present suffering leads to future suffering, with no positive outcomes achieved. Present suffering, future happiness. Many people are born with the seeds of greed, anger, and delusion, but they recognize their limitations and make efforts to transform themselves. As a result, they are able to alleviate their suffering. All monks, to some extent, are influenced by their previous habits before ordination, and they strive to transform these habits. Some succeed, others fail. Similarly, lay people, despite being educated and trained in good environments, can still make mistakes because their inherent nature, or as Buddhism terms it, the bad seeds from their past, are still too strong. The new power of education is not yet sufficient to completely change their consciousness, so they still exhibit negative behaviors. Understanding this helps us refrain from criticizing anyone and instead develop empathy for human limitations. As long as one is still an ordinary person, mistakes and limitations are inherent traits. In the present, Those who are not as successful as others in certain areas should strive hard without feeling discouraged, jealous, or inferior. Strive diligently and work hard, and the results will be as desired. Inferiority and self-doubt only stifle potential. Jealousy and envy diminish one's blessings. A jealous person's face can never look beautiful. They always appear older than their age because their mind is weighed down by constant pain. In the tendency of present suffering, future happiness, the law of cause and effect unfolds over time. Good seeds sown in the present may take 30 years or many lifetimes to bear fruit. The speed at which they bear fruit depends greatly on conditions. A lifetime of doing good, but with a past full of wrongdoings, leaves many bad seeds. The good deeds have not yet had the chance to bear fruit. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha gives an analogy. If we stir a spoonful of sugar into a small glass of water, the water tastes very sweet. The same spoonful of sugar in a basin of water, with a volume 100 times greater than the glass, will not make the water taste as sweet. At best, it will be mildly sweet. If we stir the spoonful of sugar into the ocean's saltiness will completely overpower the sweetness of the sugar. That spoonful of sugar can only create sweetness in a pure stream of water with no other flavors. Similarly, if someone has been pure and innocent for many lifetimes, the fruit of their good deeds in this life will manifest quickly, like morning effort yields evening results. But if someone has accumulated many wrongdoings over many lifetimes, the spoonful of sugar of good deeds in this life is not enough to bring immediate sweetness or blessings. Consider that the unmanifested good deeds are like a savings investment that will be used in the future. Quick blessings from good deeds might be exhausted soon, leaving nothing behind. Such an understanding prevents us from becoming impatient and disappointed from waiting. Efforts do not necessarily produce results in the expected time frame. The nature of the results is proportional to the total sum of conditions, both good and bad, in the present and past. Understand that whenever there is an opportunity to do good, it adds value to oneself and avoids the cycle of bad karma. Whether the fruit bears in this life or the next is not important. What matters is becoming a person of ethical integrity. Present happiness, future happiness. The Buddhist scriptures describe situations where many individuals, having practiced for many lifetimes, are born with the inherent potential for good and minimal greed, anger, and delusion. If they are born into a good environment and develop their spiritual lives, they can become exemplary figures in society, contributing selflessly without expecting recognition or feeling pride. They become completely selfless individuals with boundless compassion. Regarding greed, practitioners maintain a stance of unyielding to force, meaning they do not succumb to coercion, threats, or even the prospect of death to fall into the pursuit of pleasure. Regarding anger, they never become agitated when criticized, maligned, or unfairly judged. The Buddha believed that, if there is no place to receive the gifts of anger, the person bringing the gifts must take them back. Remaining calm and indifferent can disarm the opposition. Showing anger is falling into a trap. The more one expresses anger, the more mistakes they make. Regarding delusion, practitioners are wise in their judgments and resolutions of issues. They solve problems without regret or disappointment, as their actions yield satisfactory results. The Buddha said that, besides having inherent potential for goodness, they also possess exceptional talents in various fields without much effort. They learn quickly, often understanding deeply without formal learning, but they do not rest on their laurels and continue striving for greater knowledge. For those who practice, in addition to pursuing spiritual well-being, they also strive to renounce all sexual activities and sensory pleasures. They do not fall into evil or sinful acts, even under coercion or temptation. They practice meditation, diligently working to transform their emotions so that worldly pleasures do not affect them. They find joy in the Dharma, in meditation, in practice, in transformation, in charity, and in selfless service. In essence, they replace ordinary pleasures with higher, more meaningful joys, making mundane enjoyments irrelevant. Ultimately, when they achieve a state of meditation free from thoughts of suffering and happiness, they remain calm and unaffected by the vicissitudes of life. In such a state, the true value of happiness and peace manifests. Therefore, Those with positive potential will see long-lasting results from their practice. Many people hesitate to ordain because they are unsure if they have the roots of practice. Believing that only those with inherent potential can succeed in spiritual practice is a misconception. While inherent potential may make practice easier, those without it can still achieve equivalent results through effort. Misunderstanding that one must have potential to practice leads people to quit when faced with difficulties. Instead of striving for success, they choose to return to lay life. In reality, many who ordain in their youth, despite having stable careers and education, often perform more spiritual duties than those who ordain as children. When ordaining as adults, they do so with clear ideals, awareness, and self-discipline, thus achieving a higher level of practice. Those who ordain as children, having fewer opportunities to err due to their sheltered upbringing, often continue the monastic life from past lifetimes, leading to steady but unremarkable contributions. Therefore, sowing good seeds in the present will yield positive results in future lives. Having inherent good potential now, one should not be complacent but strive to develop further for better outcomes. The third and fourth scenarios indirectly explain why a lifetime of good deeds can still encounter many trials. Analyzing the four karmic scenarios: present happiness, future suffering, present suffering, future happiness, present suffering, future suffering, and present happiness, future happiness, shows that all happiness and suffering depend on individual effort. In other words, the essence of karma is dependent on human actions. No deity or supreme being can witness or intervene. Each person is responsible for their own actions and consequences. The Chittagarbha Sutra states that even close relatives like parents cannot endure suffering on behalf of their children. Such is the nature of karma. This sutra, though brief, clarifies the perspective and unwavering belief in karma, ensuring practitioners never doubt the good or the negative consequences of unwholesome actions in the present. All results have varying durations, heavily influenced by conditions.